When I was in like third grade, I was convinced that I didn't like science. We spent like a half hour doing a write up on this thing where she dictated in front of the entire class verbatim what we were supposed to write. Even though matter and energy were not created or destroyed, my interest in science at the time was totally destroyed.
Welcome back to the Open Ed podcast. Before we get going, I would love to tell you about today's guests. So meet Jack, a mechanical engineer with a passion for rethinking how we teach science. He has experienced nearly every type of education firsthand, public, private, charter, and homeschool, and now runs Clean Your Craft, where he's developing hands-on physics kits and a Physics for Makers curriculum designed to spark real curiosity in kids. And joining him today is Rachel, a former high school math teacher who now works online while homeschooling her 3 kids. With a deep passion for making math and science relatable and fun, she loves inspiring others to see the beauty in numbers and the wonder in how the world works. And I'm your sometimes host, Andrea Fife. Let's dive in and discover how to keep real curiosity at the heart of education. Welcome, Jack and Rachel. Tell us a little bit about how you feel like science education is going in the world today.
I think that science and the way it is taught should be fun, and it often isn't. Like, it should be the subject where you get to do stuff. You get to touch things, you get to play with things, you get to see what they do. I guess that's true of art and definitely PE, but other than that, most things are kind of on book, on paper. Science should be the break that kids get from that, but often it's not. It's just as much paper stuff as all the other subjects. I love science. That's probably going to become apparent throughout this interview. And I love making and building and math and engineering, all things related to that. But when I was in like third grade, I was convinced that I didn't like science. The reason for that was because I don't think I had a very good third grade science teacher. I'm not going to name her. I don't even remember her name. But if I did, we'll just call her Mrs. Smith. When Mrs. Smith would have us do an experiment, I swear it was more about the write-up than the experiment. Like, I actually remember we did one where we magnetized a needle and put it on like a foam packing peanut and put it in a bowl of water so that it could align with magnetic north, basically be a homemade compass. The experiment itself was fine. It's a good way to learn about magnetism, but it took like 25 seconds to do. And then we spent like a half hour doing a write-up on this thing where she dictated in front of the entire class verbatim what we were supposed to write in this write-up. And it's the most boring thing ever. And she was going through things like matter was not created or destroyed, energy is not created or destroyed, things that are true but not really even relevant. And the whole time, even as a third grader, I could tell that I couldn't tell that it was a bad way to teach science. I just thought that science sucked. But I could tell that there was something wrong with this. And I was just thinking, like, of course matter wasn't created, destroyed. We put a piece of foam and a little metal stick in water. Like, what did you think was going to happen? The whole thing just felt ridiculous. Even though matter and energy were not created or destroyed, my interest in science at the time was totally destroyed because I thought it was just some bureaucratic rule-following thing where you just had to write a bunch of stuff down just because, the man said you had to. It wasn't until a few years later that I came to realize, oh, science is amazing. Mrs. Smith wasn't the best.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I feel like learning math and science should be fun, and so often it's just not. And sometimes it's the way that you're even taught to teach that is not fun. I feel like when I was teaching high school, I was on the other side of that issue. So as a classroom teacher, my first few years of teaching, all my training and everything, my focus was about ensuring students were proficient, teaching them exactly how to approach a problem, follow the steps, check every box, make sure you get the right answer. But over time, I realized that this approach was limiting for students, some remedial students, but actually more often for my advanced students, my honors level students. This took their thinking and really limited them. Their thinking became almost robotic. So if they were given a question and it didn't look exactly like the examples they were given before, they would freeze up. They would have no idea how to even get started. So since then, I have come a long ways, and I've come to understand that true understanding doesn't come from drilling those textbook procedures. It takes creativity and flexibility And sometimes even pushing students, making them think for themselves, because sometimes that's actually even a challenge.
Yeah, I think it found it interesting that you mentioned like drilling or memorizing textbooks procedures. I swear every single year, every science class I had, we would spend like a week or two going over the steps of the scientific method, memorizing each one. And one thing, it felt really redundant, and it felt like those steps didn't actually match up super well with what I considered to be like real investigating or learning, that it doesn't always follow these rigid steps. It's not always in order. Sometimes you go a little bit and then you have to go back because you discovered something and screwed something up. And so, like, well, why write a conclusion when your results were bad? Just go back and change something and get better results. I found it interesting, as my favorite version of the steps of the scientific method that I've found actually has come from watching Sesame Street with my kids. Their version is, I wonder, what if, let's try. And obviously there are sub steps to that. You could break it down, you could overcomplicate it, but I really like that version of just like, let's try it.
That's great. And it sounds like if you approached it that way, students would probably be having more fun, aside from just trying to inject fun into science or into math. You know, we're talking about some really related fields here, really kind of this more comprehensive idea of STEM. What should we be doing to improve how STEM is approached?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I consider all of the STEM things, science, technology, engineering, math, to be kind of the same basic thing, just on different portions of a spectrum. Or if we're including STEAM, you know, we can include art there. It kind of, in my opinion, has its own spectrum of what's a little bit more technical and about, you know, following certain techniques or procedures, and then what's more free-flowing and artistic. Just talking about these basic subjects. On the one end, you have the completely theoretical or abstract, which is math. It just talks about like numbers and shapes and how those numbers and shapes relate to each other. Next, you have science, which science does its best to describe and understand how the world around us works. Math often is a big part of that because math is kind of the language of science. You know, a lot of things out there and how those things work, they have mathematical relationships with each other. Things tend to fall at a certain rate, and we can assign a number to that. Different things on different sides of a lever have a mathematical relationship to each other. There's math involved. Next, we have engineering, which is kind of the so what side of science. It basically is like, okay, so we've learned these things about how the world works. Now, how can we manipulate the world to make it more what we want it to be? How can we optimize this thing? How can we tweak this little parameter or input variable to get the output that we want? And then finally, you have technology, which is the kind of application of engineering and science. And I'm also going to include making and building as kind of a subset of technology. In part, those are things that I feel are lacking in most traditional education. Is most kids don't know how to make anything. They don't know how to fix anything unless they've really specifically sought out some sort of shop class or something. Generally, the kids that seek that out are the kids that actually already have some of those aptitudes or have learned some of that stuff at home. The reason I talked about this whole spectrum thing is I think that traditional education spends maybe a little bit too much time over here on the left end. They, tends to start with the theory and then kind of move more towards the application and the problem solving. Typically, this stuff on the right isn't even touched in a lot of education. But that can lead to a couple of problems. One is, as Rachel mentioned, that you get these kind of kids who are a little bit robotic. They know how to answer questions that are in a textbook. You give them a textbook question, boom, they've got it. But then they don't know how to apply that, or they don't know how to write their own questions based off of what's happening around them. And so they're kind of end up lacking some of this problem solving and reasoning, even though they might be really great at like the computation and the facts. If you're only dealing with this left side here, then you get that constant question that kids ask of, when are we going to use this in real life? I'm actually curious, with both of you guys having teaching experience, have you guys ever gotten that question and kind of struggled to come up with an answer of when are you going to use this?
100 times, yes. And I think on one level, you build trust with your students that, yes, we're building this skill and then we're going to use it in this application. And so building that trust with your students is necessary, but you want them to know, like, understand that this really and truly is something that's useful. So what if people didn't start on the left-hand side of the spectrum? What happens if people start on the far right-hand side of the spectrum and they start with, here is a problem, and you don't have any of the skills needed to solve this problem? I'm just interested in hearing your thoughts on if you think that people can start on the right and go back to the left. How do you feel about that?
Yeah. First of all, yes. The simple answer, yes, you totally can, and you often should. So to illustrate this, I wanted to give an example of a way that my dad taught me. So my dad is not what you would typically think of as an educator, nor is he an academic of any kind. But when, and go back just a touch, obviously I have a mechanical engineering degree. So I took quite a bit of math, science, engineering classes, a lot of the stuff that dealt on the theoretical side. But when it comes to like actually solving problems, whether the problem solving approach involves more theoretical or practical skills, I feel like most of my knowledge related to problem solving came from my dad, not from any of my PhD professors or, highly accomplished. So I wanted to kind of explain a little bit what teaching or being taught by my dad looks like. So when I was about 8 or 9, I came up to my dad and I asked him if he could build me a treehouse. And his response was, nope, but I can help you build a treehouse. And I was kind of a bit confused by that, but I was like, well, whatever, I'm getting a treehouse. That's all I really care about. So I was like, okay, well, if you're helping me build a treehouse, let's go, let's do it. And so he told me that before we could actually start building in a tree, he wanted me to get better at climbing a tree. So we went out, he kind of showed off a little bit of his own climbing skills and told me some benchmarks that he wanted me to meet before I could be considered monkey enough to build a treehouse in a tree. So I spent the next couple of days climbing all over the trees in our yard, swinging from one branch to another, jumping and swinging, practicing all sorts of fancy dismounts so that I could prove to my dad that I was monkey enough to start doing this. After the first day, I'm pretty sure I had already totally met his benchmarks and done some other. I'm a pretty good climber, and I already was. But I'm pretty sure he just kept the monkey thing going for a few days because he didn't have time to actually start doing stuff yet. So he's like, okay, just keep learning, keep at it. We'll start soon, maybe tomorrow. After I'd finally been officially pronounced monkey enough, then he was like, okay, next thing. It was actually my birthday at the time, and he gave me a cordless drill along with a bunch of Phillips bits and some screws. He knew that I was going to be really bad at using it at first, and that I was going to trash a whole bunch of bits, strip them so they don't really work anymore. But he was fine with that. That's why he got me a bunch. And then he was like, hey, so I'm actually needing to replace a bunch of the deck boards on the back deck. I need someone with a brand new drill who needs to learn how to use it a little bit, who could put a bunch of screws down. Do you know anybody like that? Which is very much my dad's way of teaching and approaching things. I'm not sure if it's been mentioned yet. Andrea is actually my sister. We have the same dad. So she might be laughing a little bit at these stories because of that. Then, once I had put down a whole bunch of screws in the deck and made him super frustrated because he had to take out a whole bunch of screws that I had stripped really bad, but I got to where I was at least pretty okay at it. Then I was like, okay, we can build the treehouse in it right now, right? I can use the tools. I can use tools in a tree. It's like, yeah, mostly. But before we actually go out and get materials, we need to come up with a design of what we're going to make so that we know what materials to get. So then he gave me a pencil and paper and ruler and had me draw out a whole bunch of different designs. I learned pretty quickly like what I needed to do, how I needed to draw so that my dad could actually understand what I just scribbled on paper. And he gave me some tips on how to do different views, things like that. It also just so happened that at the same time in my school, we were supposed to do this big project competition thing where the prompt was we were just supposed to make something to represent some sort of dream that I had. So my parents were like, well, you seem to have a dream about having a treehouse, so why don't you make like a miniature treehouse out of popsicle sticks, and that can be your dream, and that can also be like another step of you designing this thing. So I did that. I'm pretty sure that as part of that competition thing, I think my treehouse thing actually like one at the school level and then at the regional level, and then went to state. And I guess I didn't win there because I don't really remember what happened after that. But yeah, I did pretty well in this competition. And I actually kind of learned and found out that it was also really useful to have. As I was talking with my dad, I was like, hey, what if we put like a pulley and a bucket over here? And maybe what about a fireman's pole? And, we talked about all sorts of things that we didn't end up incorporating, but it was useful to have this thing that we could be like, okay, well, what about right here? What are we going to do here? And it was really great to have.
That sounds like quite the interesting project. My husband was replacing our wooden deck. The wooden steps needed a new stringer built.
Yeah.
And he mentioned that to me, like, oh, I need you to calculate how long this needs to be and what the angles need to be. And then he was cutting it out. And I remember thinking, oh, this would be a great project for my students in the classroom because they were actually learning about solving right triangles then. And so I took some pictures and made them a fun little handout with some questions and presented it to the class. And interestingly, my class responded completely different than you did as a child building your treehouse. And they complained and they said it was too hard. And I got questions like, why can't we just do the worksheet on these? Why do we have to do such a hard problem? And it's because they were stuck way over there on the left-hand side of your spectrum with the math problems. And that whole other side of the spectrum was just a skill that they hadn't developed yet, because it takes a lot more creativity and mental, strength to wrestle with a problem and to figure it out. And it's a whole other set of skills that many of them just really hadn't developed yet. It's interesting to me that if you start at the end and you start with the why and then go backwards and figure out all the how, sometimes you have a totally different result.
I think there's also something to be said for it being your own problem that you're very invested in. I wonder if those same students would have been a lot more motivated if, say, their parents said, we can install a swimming pool if you can figure out how to replace the deck, right? And, I think students really see through the fake problems that we put in their path, even if it is like real world learning. If it isn't in their real world, I think sometimes it can still just feel like, okay, it's a well-written textbook problem, but it still feels like a textbook problem if it's delivered in the classroom instead of on location, screwdriver in hand in your own backyard. Well, I think this is a great thing to discuss. There's a word in academia for what we're talking about, which is project-based learning. And the challenges to project-based learning, why people maybe shy away from this, what it is, what it works well. But what Jack is describing as the way that our dad teaches, a lot of teachers would probably call project-based learning.
Yeah, I think that is. So we didn't know that at the time. And I'm sure my dad still doesn't, because he doesn't have any formal background in any sort of teaching philosophies, even though I consider him to be a really good one-on-one teacher. But he could have totally just built the treehouse by himself. He's a really skilled builder. It wouldn't have been that big of a deal for him. But instead, he saw that I was really excited about something, which I think can be the difference between the real world-based problem that's still a textbook problem because it's based off of someone else's real world. The kid might go, okay, well, I'm not a framer, so what do I care about stair stringers? Like, I'm never going to do that. But if it's something that the kid is already really excited about and willing to put in a lot of work for, that's where project-based learning can really excel. And that's where I was really excited about this treehouse thing. And he saw that. So he's like, okay, I can use this to teach my kid a whole bunch of stuff. And in the process, I learned how to use power tools. I learned how to climb trees. I got good exercise. I learned how to make technical sketches and communicate those ideas and draw better. I learned a lot of things. And I think all in all, I probably spent like 120 hours of really self-motivated learning, doing these things. And my dad probably put in like 5 or 10 hours of occasionally giving me some feedback or presenting me with a new challenge. And then he spent money on a cordless drill and popsicle sticks and other supplies too. But I think all in all, for the time and money he put in, he was able to get quite a bit of excited learning out of me. So in that case, I think the project-based learning, starting from the I want to make something, I want to accomplish something, and then figuring out how. I think that worked pretty well for me. Also, as a side note, a lot of employers out there are starting to hire based more off of the skills that a candidate has than their degree or academic credentials. But there's still that question, well, how do you communicate that you have a skill? And you can say it, but if you don't have a degree or credential to back it up, then what does it mean anything? Well, a good thing about this project-based stuff is that if you have done a bunch of projects and you document that, you can create like a portfolio that you could present and use to demonstrate the skills that you've learned.
Rachel, I'm really interested because you've been an educator in the classroom, but you also teach your own kids at home. I'm really curious how that differs for you, what you feel like you can implement in a classroom versus what's possible with that open education style you've chosen for your family.
Well, I feel like this whole discussion on project-based learning brings up a really important question. If we know that this is a great way of learning, why aren't schools doing more project-based learning? And I think it comes down to logistics. If you have a class of 30 students and they all pick 30 different projects, you can't feasibly come alongside every single one of them and help them. And if you need to develop a certain set of skills, there is no guarantee that the particular project they pick is going to hit on all of those skills that they need to learn. They will probably learn some great skills, but you won't know until the project is done what those skills actually are. And so I think some of that, creating a little bit of a structure and saying, okay, now here's something we can do. And here's some of the skills I really am hoping that we can learn as we go, and giving a little bit of choice within structure is kind of the way to go. And it's a lot easier when you don't have a full classroom of students and when you have more flexibility in education and smaller numbers of students at a time. You have a lot more ability to pick those projects and go further with them.
I, like everyone here, I've had a bunch of diverse education experiences. As a parent, I've chosen to partner with our local public schools to kind of handle that left end of the spectrum with my kids. I feel like they're getting a pretty solid education there, but where I choose to supplement is more on that right hand of the spectrum, asking questions about what they're studying in the classroom and then looking for ways to extend that at home, because I know I can do things at home one-on-one that I could never expect my kids' teachers to be able to do in that educational setting I've chosen for them. So as a parent, whether you're a parent that is full-time homeschool, if you're doing a hybrid model, if you're looking to supplement and give your kids more opportunities on that maker creator technology side, Jack, do you have any recommended resources for parents who are looking to do more on that side of the education spectrum?
Yeah. So I think, as both of you guys mentioned, it can be a lot about maybe picking and choosing some things from here, using the traditional in-school education for some things and supplementing with this at home. This is where I'd like to talk specifically about some of the stuff that I'm developing. So as was mentioned in the beginning, my wife and I are working on something we call Creators Craft Crates, which includes both kits, physical kits for learning, as well as curriculum. Now, these kits could be technically called STEM kits. I'm going to choose to call them physics kits. The reason for that is I have some problems with a lot of the STEM kits that are out there. First of all, I feel like a lot of them are just toys. They're just kind of cash grabs from companies where they've thrown some educational stuff on the box so that it looks like it has educational value when there's really not much educational value there. The other problem I have with a lot of these kits out there, even though there are some great ones, I don't want to put them all down, but most of them I feel like don't really leave any room for the kids to make creative choices or do their own thing. Basically, it's, they start with something that is pre-designed and pre-manufactured to be a certain thing, and the kids assemble that and it turns into that thing, and that's it. It doesn't matter who got the box or what they decided to do. As long as they followed the instructions, everybody ends up with the same thing. And it might be a nice thing that's fun and does what it's supposed to, but what did the kid really learn when all they're doing is just following instructions? Basically their kit was just IKEA furniture that They assemble it, they follow the instructions. It's just in this case, the IKEA furniture is shaped like a dinosaur or a solar system, but they're still not really creating. They're just assembling. I think a good example of this in the Lego movie, for those who aren't familiar, the main character, Emmett, he starts out as a construction worker who just follows all of the instructions to the letter, including his social life. He watches the exact show that he's told he's supposed to watch, listens to the music he's told he's supposed to watch. He's just an instruction follower. And then as the movie progresses, he learns to start to pursue and develop his own original ideas. And that in doing so, he becomes what they refer to as the master builders. And I think that it was really interesting that they used this specifically in the Lego movie, because there are kind of two approaches to Lego. One is you get a really cool box and you follow the instructions and you end up with what's on the picture of the box, which there's some great things to that approach. One is you'll probably get a good end result. Another is, following directions and instructions is useful and important as a life skill. You might end up being really good at that, but then you don't really know how to make or do anything on your own, how to make something from an idea in your head rather than instructions on a paper. And so the other side of Lego is just you start with a jumbled mess of Lego in a bin and you just start making and you figure out what it's going to be, what you want to do. You just kind of figure things out along the way. I wanted to bring a little bit more of the you figure it out approach, this project-based learning type thing. But as was discussed, that can do better within a structure, because if it's just a kid picks a project and they follow it, then their learning experience can be pretty patchy. They get some things here, some things there, but other things that are important and they probably should have been taught at that age might get skipped. And those skills on the left side of the spectrum that we keep talking about, those ones can get kind of jumped over or lost. In fact, I'm going to share my screen again. What we kind of been talking about here is that the traditional education can do a really good job on this left end, and then you kind of end up lacking on the right end. And then the project-based learning, you can kind of end up with the opposite problem of, maybe you're pretty good at the kid ends up learning a lot of hands-on skills, some application, but maybe their writing or math or kind of base technical skills just end up really lacking. So what I think work best is a hybrid approach where you have projects, you have a reason for learning things so that kids start to see the knowledge that they're gaining as tools to accomplish their goals. You have some of those positive aspects of project-based learning, but it's still within a structure and a framework, so that you're still making sure to hit the right points. You're not having gaps in what they're learning. And I think that this way can really be kind of the best of both worlds. Additionally, this is kind of how jobs work. It's not like anyone comes up to you and they're like, okay, well, I'm gonna pay you for this year, and you can just decide to work on whatever you want to work on for this year, and just make sure it's something you like. I'll make sure you have what you need to do it. Just work on whatever you... No, those, generally speaking, those jobs do not exist. It's someone comes up to you and says, hey, I need you to do this. And then within that structure and framework, you have the freedom to decide your own approach, how you want to do it. I don't think it's necessarily preparing kids very well for the real world to have a totally open-ended, you can do whatever you want and learn whatever you want type thing. But I also don't think it's great to be, hey, you can only learn these things in this way, and none of it's going to feel like it matters because it just feels like learning for learning's sake or learning for test taking's sake rather than learning so that you can accomplish cool things.
I had the awesome opportunity to test some of your early kit designs with my kids. And I'm thinking about their reactions to, I think you call it a car launcher. There was definitely some steps to follow, but pretty quickly we had a car launcher. And the point was not to build the car launcher. The point was to launch things. And that was pretty clearly explained in the materials that came. In my household, we're pretty good at the try things and see what happens, maybe a little too good at it, maybe a little too crazy with the things that we're willing to try. So we jumped pretty immediately into the kids saying, I wonder what would happen if we launched these peppermints down the stairs. at the dog, the types of things that are definitely the barriers removed approach to learning. But I'm thinking about the fact that my kids have been raised around people who are naturally likely to go there. They're not the type of students who are going to stare at you and say, well, what next? What am I allowed to do next? What am I supposed to do next? Instead, you'd have to hold them back and say, that's not what you're supposed to do. Do you have any advice for helping kids who don't know that it's okay to create, who are used to book learning, who are used to worksheets? What would you suggest to help somebody become a maker, unleash their creative thinking?
Yeah, so I have several suggestions, both for kids and for parents. My first suggestion is to just start doing it. Just try it. You're probably going to be bad at it at first, but just start trying. And then for parents, let them try. Let them be bad at something. Anyone who's gotten to be pretty good at something. That skill comes from two sources. One is natural aptitude and abilities, and the other one is learned skills, whether that's learned through exercise, through muscle memory, through trying. But in order to be really good at something, you need a combination of both. One thing that means is that if you want to be good at something, it's a required, unskippable step to start by being bad at it. You can't just expect to, oh, well, it didn't work out very well, so I guess I just can't do that. I'm just bad. Well, yeah, of course you are. You just barely started. You are on your journey. You are on level 1. You aren't ready to battle a boss yet. You're still figuring some things out. Right now, you're bad, and that's great. That's where you're supposed to start. So that's my main advice, is just start. And now my advice for the parents is, so kids, especially young kids, they start out as a default level. They do want to try things. They want to try everything. They see you cooking, they want to cook. They see you building, they want to build. They want to do everything. So my advice is let them try. Obviously, they're not going to be great at it to start. And maybe some of the things that they want to do aren't safe, or they're too big, they're too messy. Like, no, you can't practice cutting the tile for our bathroom. We only bought so much. We're not going to buy another pack. There are things that you're not going to let your kids do. But there are plenty of things that maybe aren't that expensive, aren't that dangerous or that messy, that you could let them do. So if they come up to you and like, hey, I want to do this, then like, great. Maybe we can't quite do that, but we can scale it down a little bit or find a more kid-friendly version of that and start doing that. So if we take building skills, for example, the kid wants to start building cool things. They're probably not going to start by building a big bookshelf or a piece of furniture. Maybe, especially if they're like 4 or something, they're not really ready to build hardly anything with real wood. But what they can do is they can take some cardboard and they can tape it together and they can cut it, maybe with some adult assistance, depending on their skills there. And they can start to connect their ideas with the real world. They can start to learn what their hands can do and what their hands can't do. They can learn what the tools around them can and can't do, what the materials can and can't do, and all of those things. And once they start, they will immediately start learning, start getting better, and then pretty soon they will be better.
Rachel, have you had any experiences with your own kids or with students that come to mind of some of these just let them try, just let them start somewhere experiences?
Yes. I have a 7-year-old son, and his absolute favorite thing right now is building robots. And he wants to use everything in the house. And so I started making it a little bit more of a habit of anytime I go to throw away something that would be kind of a recycling item, instead of throwing it out, I ask him, do you want to add this to your robot stuff kit? So he has toilet paper rolls and duct tape and random plastic things off of packaging, and he loves it. And the more he builds, the more he sees what he can build. And so then sometimes he'll say, hey, can you buy me a package of rubber bands? Hey, can you get me some of these? Can you get me some of those? And the more that he builds, the better he gets at it. And he's 7. His robots are not going to do anything besides sit there and look cool. But as he is building, he is developing those skills. I can see that as he continues to build, he's growing those skills just by playing with the recycling.
That's Jack. What's something that a kid can start doing right now, regardless of skill level, knowing that this is a lead in to something exciting you want to share with the listeners?
Yeah. Before I share my exciting thing, I just wanted to say that I love Rachel's approach of just using cheap things around the house. Learning by working with things, it doesn't require working with nice things. Maybe certain levels of learning later, but you don't need to start there. It can start cheap with just whatever you have around. In a lot of ways, that actually fuels the creative process better because you have those constraints of like, I'm limited to only the things around me. And maybe this thing was never meant to be used this way, but could it be used this way? Let me see. Rather than like, well, I have the full extent of the internet and I can just buy a bunch of things that were made to do a specific thing and they'll probably do that thing because somebody else already designed it to happen. Along those lines, I know it can be really hard to have like a starting place. So I wanted to host a small competition for kids. This is for kids of any age, any skill level. The competition is going to be a bridge building competition where you build the bridges out of food. So basically like a gingerbread house or whatever, but it's a bridge. Part of the reason I wanted to do this is, first of all, hopefully everyone has some food. I want it to be accessible, something that you don't have to go out and buy anything specific for. I want kids to be able to learn that creating something doesn't have to be this magnificent, refined thing. I think that kids tend to see in a lot of movies, television, and media, they tend to see, oh, well, this character had an idea, and so they went into the garage, and then boom, they whipped out this thing that looks like a finished product. Things that light up, even though they don't have to. Everything looks perfect. It looks like it's about ready to just be put on a shelf. And that's not how it works. The starting steps are messy. They're kind of janky. That's fine. It's you learn from those limitations. You learn from those failures. So as part of it, so as this contest, I wanted kids to be able to create something for a purpose with materials and things that weren't specifically designed for that purpose, so that you can learn to think outside the box a little bit. You can make a bridge out of food and then test the weight-bearing capacity of that bridge by just putting a grocery bag around it and putting weights in it. In this case, I'm suggesting water bottles because everyone has those typically. And that in doing so, you can test and see how well the bridge does at bearing weight. As part of this contest, I'm asking the kids to take a video of their bridge, show it being tested so that you have the evidence that you can share that it held this much weight. And you can share that with a specific hashtag. That helps me find it, but it also helps the other participants find them so that they can compare. Like, oh, well, what did someone else do? Because I think one problem that you can run into, especially with homeschool education, is I think sometimes you can lack a measuring stick. Maybe you're given a grade, maybe you're not. But even if you are given a grade, it's like, well, it's given to you by your mom. So like, what does that mean? And as far as how much do you actually know? Like, did I do a good job or does my mom think I'm cool? With a little bit more community engagement and interaction, you can go, oh, well, this other kid about my age, he built this, and I think my bridge is better, so I think I'm doing okay. Or this other kid did some really cool things. I think I'm going to try to learn from what they did. But you can get a little bit more, community engagement and interaction and some of that learning that can come from other people. As far as how to actually participate in this contest, I guess I should mention that stuff. So the submission window for the contest will end on May 18th, 2025. So if you're seeing this video and it's before that, jump on it, make a quick bridge. It doesn't have to be a big, difficult thing. And then to submit, you just take a video and submit that. I'll have a link in the description of this with some more specific guidelines and steps for how to participate.
That's great.
I will definitely be having my kids participate in that because that sounds like a blast.
You see, it sounds like it would be right up your 7-year-old's alley to look around and see what can be done. I'm checking my calendar. I'm like May 18th, thinking if I can get my kids to submit by then as well. Are adults allowed to participate, Jack? Can I make a bridge and can I send it to you? And will you tell me I did a good job?
Well, only if you did a good job.
That's fair.
So there won't be any necessarily official winning, but those that are sent to me that were able to handle a lot of weight or I think did a really good job in other ways, whether it looked really cool or they used some food item in what I thought was a really creative way, or maybe it broke in the most spectacular way, or I thought the kid just did a really good job of remaining happy and being excited, even though what they made wasn't very good. Whatever. I'm going to make a highlight video of the ones that I think were really great. I'll post that on my YouTube channel so that the kids can see that they got that recognition. If they don't happen to get chosen, I'll be doing other contests, other things after that. They'll have other chances. As far as can adults participate? Yeah, of course. I was talking about there not being any age limits or constraints to creating other than ones that we kind of tend to make up ourselves. That's not just on the lower end. Adults can start doing things too, especially if they're fun. Like, why not? You don't have to take a real course and do textbook problems. You're an adult now. You've escaped that part of your life. Congratulations. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't still seek out fun ways to learn and grow your skills.
That's great. I just really enjoy flexing that part of my brain in unexpected ways, like turning food into bridges in the kitchen. It sounds like a lot of fun to me. Well, thank you both for joining us today. I think this has been a really engaging conversation about how to put the creativity back into these areas that should be creative, how to find the balance, some great ideas of where to get started, and a fun challenge to put it into real use right away. So I'm excited and can't wait to see where this goes.